All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. All right, so welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Every month, Generation Schools Network, school districts and organizations have the opportunity to connect, to share resources and ideas in a community space, and to problem solve together so that we can ensure that every student receives social emotional learning support. So I would just like to thank you all for connecting with us today as we discuss this month's topic of executive functioning to do just that. And throughout the meeting today, well, we would just like you to first change your settings from gallery view to speaker view, and you can do that by clicking the view button in the top right corner of your Zoom screen. We ask that you just remain muted throughout the presentation, but we do want active participation, so we ask that you add any questions or comments in the chat box. And we also ask that you just sit back and relax and absorb what Jennifer and Donna have to present today, because we will be sharing all of our slides and the recording as well as the resources after the presentation is done. So with that, I will hand it over to Donna.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about and learning about managing executive functioning at school and home. So our hope, Jennifer and my hope today, is that you'll be able to take away some new learning and meld it with what you already know and some new ideas for supporting the children that you work with. And go to the next. And so a little bit about myself. I am a former director of Douglas County, and I currently work as a senior education specialist with Generation Schools Network. And then on the side of that, I have my own company as an educational advocate.
And I'm Jennifer Price. I have a background in child development and research, and I was also a classroom teacher, but now I own a company called Learning Foundations, and we are academic coaches who specialize in education, and we help families navigate 504s, IEPs, and all sorts of things. So it's nice to be here.
Hey, so Jennifer and I actually connected through our advocacy work together, and the work that Learning Foundations does is amazing, and especially with the executive functioning, because a lot of the students they get into their practice are struggling with this. And so GSN, we asked Jennifer to join today because she truly is an expert and has created a lot of systems through her work and research with students that align to both school and home. So today we're going to be talking about what is executive functioning, how can the executive function be taught in a remote learning setting, what are some strategies students can use to stay organized in a remote learning world, how can parents best support students while also teaching them the skills needed to be more self-sufficient, and what is fair to expect of high needs learners regarding organization and time management. I do want to let you know it's a huge topic, so we will not be able to get through all of it today. We're going to get through the foundation of everything, and then we'll be having a second part 2 next Tuesday at the same time to continue our learning. You can go to the next. So within the chat, or even just unmuting yourself and sharing out, can you please let Jennifer and I and the rest of the group know what you think executive functioning is, or what the definition of it is to you, or where have you seen it come into play in children you have worked with? So let's take a minute. You can type what you think into the chat, or you can just speak out loud.
And it's certainly a hard question to answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a lot of different ways that we describe executive functioning, so it'll be interesting to see how others describe it. And I often find, to be honest, Donna, I often find that people aren't sure how to describe it. So maybe.
There we go. Here's some. So we see it as an overall ability to organize thoughts. Yep, definitely. Primary functioning of the cognitive learning, ways to organize and plan our to-do lists and work, a set of mental skills, referenced in the IEP meetings for students struggling with making decisions, organization, materials, or steps of a process, memory, self-control, organization, plan, implement, and follow through with tasks. Yes, well, you can see just from your responses what a big topic this is. So we are going to try to keep, oh, and I love the emotional regulation piece. We will be getting to some of that today. So I'll let Jennifer go ahead and talk a little bit about what it looks like in a walk,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah. So my background in working one-to-one with kids with executive functioning issues, we've been working at Learning Foundations for about 15 years and figuring out from kids what they need. So one of the first things we know is that when we talk about executive functioning, we have to make it a visual. It has to become tangible in some way because executive functioning can be abstract. So for students, we'll often give them the analogy that executive functioning, the prefrontal cortex in your brain, is kind of like being a pilot in a cockpit. You know, in order to get off the ground, you have all these buttons and you have to choose which ones to hit in a certain order. If you don't hit them in the correct order, you never take off and you never fly. A second visual that we might give to kids on the next slide is that the prefrontal cortex could be like a conductor of an orchestra. That one person has to be in charge coordinating all of those other people to play in a sequence, in a pattern, in an organized way. So we have to start by making the understanding of what is executive functioning and where does it land, and it lands in the front prefrontal cortex of our brain. So if you go to the next, which is why emotional regulation comes in play. So on this slide, what I want you to know is when you go back and look at the research of executive functioning from Barkley to Brown, researchers use these 6 terms to describe executive functioning. They use the prefrontal cortex as in activation, planning, focus, and memory, and all of that goes toward decision making. And in the back of our brain, we have the emotions, which is really truly the oldest primal part of our brain. And then we have self-monitoring and flexibility. So in the back of our brain, we have regulation. We have emotional regulation and the ability to either cooperate and be flexible or not. And so we share this information with kids because it helps them understand that we're trying to get the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system to not be at war with one another, but they are. And you know that they are because under stress, when you're feeling emotional, we've all experienced, it's hard to remember something that I know so easily, like my phone number or my address when I'm stressed. And so obviously it's developmentally normal for kids to feel stressed, but then if they have executive functioning challenges, they're even more stressed and somewhat more emotional. So these 6 terms are how researchers describe what executive functioning comprises. And then if we go to the next slide.
Well, and can I jump in and say something too with that prefrontal cortex? A lot of times students who have attention and emotional regulation issues, that prefrontal cortex is not fully formed, either due to trauma they've experienced, early birth, like premature babies, drug use in utero. Lots of things can cause that prefrontal cortex to be underdeveloped. But the good news is that if we work with students, they can develop it. The brain can rewire itself and find workarounds or develop the nervous system to be able to activate that area and or compensate.
I'm so glad.
Sorry, Jen.
I'm so glad you said that because that's exactly right. We can actually learn how to control and monitor and work with our executive abilities. And you're right. It's kids with ADHD and dyslexia have a premature prefrontal lobe by 2 years. So that explains why decision making and emotional control can be somewhat more challenging because Their prefrontal cortex is more immature. But it does, continues to develop into our late 20s. And so we can learn a lot of these skills. Yeah. And on the next screen, myself as a teacher, when we work with kids, we use these 10 words to define what executive functioning is. And the reason for that is because we try to make each of these things very visual and very manageable. So if we go to the next screen, you'll see how we ask a very specific question for those 10 items. So for response inhibition, we're asking, do you control what you say? Do you wait for others to speak? And so for each of these, as we go through them, in my perspective as a coach, this is, executive functioning is a long list of things for us because we have to isolate them. And I think teachers have to understand that it's really hard to attack all of executive functioning at once because there are so many pieces. So really picking for a child or a student which one you want to focus on first and kind of building one at a time. But you can see on the right-hand side how there are questions that relate directly back to working memory, emotional control, task initiation. Anybody have questions about this? Does this seem like your questions you ask students? A lot of times when we're talking with students, this kind of gives us a comprehensive picture of their needs. So how long can you hold a thought or a fact? They can't really answer that, but that's something we're observing. We're thinking, can you hold information long enough to get that long division done? Or can you hold information in your brain so that you can actually create an outline? A lot of times when we're working with working memory, we have to teach kids how to organize their thoughts. And so we have to start by teaching them to work in the middle of the paper instead of the beginning. So they don't know what they're saying in the introduction. So we start in the middle. And how long can we hold that thought and concentrate and get some organized sequence thinking? And emotional control, how are you managing your emotions? And oh my goodness, the variety of stories we get, from hitting to screaming to tantruming. This one's tricky. And, of course, we continue to work on emotional control really our whole lives. So we just try to narrow down for students what's manageable and what's expected for your age group. You should be able to advocate for yourself. You should be able to communicate your needs. And if they don't do that, then we start with, let's talk about your needs and how to communicate it so that we can get to performance, so that we can move past this and you can start performing. And then task initiation is tricky for some and not for others. Planning and prioritization is definitely a developmental skill, and using a planner is something that a lot of people resist. So we talk about, do you want to use paper or do you want to use an electronic device? Are you going to use that phone? What kind of planner works for you? A weekly planner, a 30-day planner? Just what does time look like when we're trying to prioritize things? And then organization, we always have to make sure we keep organization simple. So when we're doing something, we have to chunk it down into a smaller size, understand it, kind of the big picture of it, and organize the big picture first, and then kind of fill in the details. So it says, does your phone have a home? And that sounds weird, but what it means is that, do you always put your phone in the same place or do you keep losing it? Do you know where your keys are? Do you always put your keys or your backpack in the same place so that you don't lose it? And so we kind of have to start with, let's find homes for the things that are really important and make sure you're always putting it back in that same place. And again, that's a habit. That's a new habit. And they may not, do it successfully for a while, but eventually it becomes a really simple skill that they can learn. And then time management, how do you really spend your time? This was kind of my favorite one because we can sit down and draw graphs and say, what do you do during your week? And I know it's COVID, so kids are definitely having more video game time and more screen time than usual, but it helps them see too how their time is really spent when we write it down. So this is how much time I spend in school. This is how much time I spend on screens. This is how much time I spend with friends. And it helps them really kind of start to prioritize, like, wow, I do spend too much time here, or I might not spend enough time there. So really seeing time is important. And then goal-directed persistence, because you have to have the persistence to keep trying. You're going to make mistakes, and you have to do this constantly in order for that neuroplasticity that Donna's referring to. You have to do it consistently and repetitively. You have to get back up once you fail. And that's an executive function. And that all goes into our emotional thinking and our thoughts and all of that. And then flexibility of thinking. Are you able to transition? How about transitioning and adjusting to change? How do you handle that? Is it a smooth transition for you, or do you find that you get flustered or frustrated when you transition? That's a really important component because it's somewhat invisible. So we have to make that tangible. And so then we talk about what are transitions. Well, transitions are from your morning routine to going to school, or transitions are going from one class to another class, or going from one website like on remote learning to another website. So these transitions for remote learning are very invisible, but they challenge students, and it can often create stress for them because they're jumping from one website to another website or another app, and there's just a lot of places they have to surf. And so I would recommend for transitions to be minimal, if teachers can do that, to really be aware that those transitions between apps and websites and portals, that's stressful stuff for some kids. And then metacognition is obviously, thinking about thinking. So what's important about that is we're thinking about thinking. So once we prompt a student to say, hey, have you ever thought about this? And they'll usually say, no, I've never really thought about how long it takes me to get ready in the morning. But once we put that on a piece of paper, and you'll see examples of how we do that, then all of a sudden they understand and they're thinking about it. And then from that perspective, we then say, let's think about how others think. Let's see another perspective. How do you think your teacher might feel? Or how do you think your mom and dad are feeling with this? And just trying to really expand the awareness they have, because that helps them become purposeful in performing executive functioning tasks. So I know that's a long list, but I wanted to be really specific to give some examples, and hopefully if you have questions, of course, post that in the chat. Donna's going to help me with that, right, Donna? We can go to the next slide. This is just an example for y'all to remember that we have two parts of the brain that are constantly wrestling or dueling. The prefrontal cortex, where we make decisions and we process logic and organization, is fighting with our limbic system, and our limbic system is emotions. It's what we feel and what we think. We can go to the next slide, because what we feel and what we think are very much it's a dueling situation, especially for kids, especially for middle school kids. There's a lot of emotion that they're navigating. And sometimes that emotion, we have to settle it first. We have to kind of just acknowledge it's there and greet it and say, what's going on emotionally? And then, okay, so once we talk about it, I don't have to solve their problem, but we have to address it, and I have to listen to it. And then that logical mind turns on, because now they've been heard. So it's a really interesting thing. We want kids to be in a state we call the wise mind, where you're using your emotions and your logic together. But we do usually have to, especially because this year in COVID has been hard and online learning has been hard, we really do have to address, like, how are you feeling? Whether it's 1 through 5, or use a color to describe how you feel today. Just acknowledging their feelings helps us move on to performance. And that's really important in executive functioning.
And I want to ask everyone, I want to take a second, if you could add it to the chat or mute yourselves. What are some ways that you have seen emotion come out in your students that you're working with? Jennifer mentioned some ways that her students have described they handle emotion, but what are some things that you have had to deal with in your everyday lives with children, and when their emotions break down? That can help Jennifer and I give you some strategies for addressing those.
That's a great question. Glad you're asking that.
anger, sadness, lack of motivation, acting out, meltdown, frustration, shut down, yep, can't process the info or steps, disengagement, emotion spills into impulse control or lack of their impulses, yep. Big reactions to simple problems, resistance to learning activities. Yeah, and so something that I have learned, like Jennifer just said, when I have students displaying the negative self-talk, and that's a great point too, the negative self-talk. But when they're overreacting or they've shut down, what I've learned to do, like Jennifer said, is say, just take a minute, let them take a breath. Don't think about anything. All I want you to do is focus on how you're feeling right now. Tell me what's going on inside your body. Sometimes I'll say it feels like I have ants running all over my body, or my mind is racing. You can even have them close their eyes and think about that energy and how it feels and looks to them to get that description, so that then you can move them forward in thinking, okay, let's focus on how that feels. And let's focus on breathing through that and imagining yourself calming down and feeling your body calming down. And when you're ready, let me know. And you kind of just keep talking them through that. And sometimes it takes students longer to do this than others, but taking that time to do so will save you time in the long run. Because if you don't take that time to do it in that moment, then they just stay elevated. Like we often hear, what level are you on? And kids will say, I'm red. And if you don't take the time to get them back down, and some of their engines are constantly running on yellow, right? They constantly have their brains thinking. So it takes them just one moment to flip to that red, and can take them a long time to come back down from it. But if you can talk to them about recognizing the feeling in that moment, calming themselves back down and getting to the point where then they're ready to move on, then the next task, you won't likely see that outburst in that way or as significant and or in as close together as the next time. And it also teaches them skills and strategies and coping strategies to deal with those feelings when they arise in the future. Because we can't just recognize things, we have to teach them the skills to process and get through it time and again. And like Jennifer said earlier, that routine, that practice is so important so that it becomes a solid place when their brain starts going crazy, their emotions start going, that they can learn, okay, I got through this before, here's how I can do it again.
Right. With neuroplasticity, you want to think of it like a hiking trail in the mountains. You know, the more you use that trail, the more it shows up and the easier it is and the faster and more automated it is. That's kind of what happens in the brain. We want the left side and the right side to work together. You know, we want to be comprehensive and whole-brained when we're doing that. And you know, kids are emotional creatures like all of us, and a lot of times they do need to have their feelings met and understood in order to take that next step. And that next step is so important because, again, you're putting the trail in place, the connections neurologically.
And sometimes you can't do that right in the moment. You might need to have them, allow them time to just be by themselves, process through it, because when your brain is at a level where you can't think, and we've all experienced it, even in our own relationships with significant others or our own children, you get to the place where you can't hear another person's words and you're interrupting or you're blowing up more and your thoughts and your words are not making sense. And you say that's where people say things that they regret. But if you can just take a couple minutes and even teach kids to say, I need 5 minutes. And during that 5 minutes, if they say that, honor it. And don't jump in. Are you ready now? Are you ready now? Really give them the time to decompress and then come back and have a conversation and look at what happened so that next time they know that they got through it and reaffirm their confidence. Just because you had this happen, we can get through it and we're going to get through it together. It's not you, it's not who you are. It's just something that happens and we can get through it together and you're an amazing person and then following through with positive reinforcement, even the little things. Wow, I love that you came today with your paper and pencil, or how you said hello to me. I appreciate that. Those little pieces of positive feedback can create the self-confidence that then lead to self-motivation and engagement.
And relationship building, because that's really what's going on too, is it's that relationship. And with remote learning, a lot of kids are telling us as coaches that they don't feel like they have that relationship with the teacher on the other side. You know, the relationship of, I don't know when to ask a question because I don't want to interrupt, or I don't know if I should ask at this time. So it's interesting. And so it's that relationship. And I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really important. The relationship is key, because later on I'm going to show you really specific this tool called Flags of the Beach, and it'll help you have a visual conversation about their emotions so you can understand where they're at. And we use it all the time here because we know that it really just recognizing, hey, I'm a double red flag today versus I'm a green flag. That just helps us know where kids are, and helps us, readjust how we're going to teach and how they're going to learn. So let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to post this information because a lot of times kids will say, I have a stomach ache or I have a headache. And this has happened in my own family as well. And it's because we have three brains. And when we go to perform, our brain, our stomach, and our heart, we actually have brain cells in our stomach and in our heart. They're all conducive to participating in how we're going to learn. And so we talk about the three brains because if someone comes in and says, my stomach hurts, I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to ask them, what does your stomach feel like? How would you describe it? Why do you think your stomach feels that way? And so, if they're hungry, that's easy. Like, let's just give them food and water. But other times the stomach is a stressful piece and they aren't sure why. So we have to talk about, okay, so the stomach goes back to emotions. Where are we at with that? And Donna, you had mentioned earlier that it's oftentimes, physical. It's a physical response to stress. And we see that in kids a lot. So just know that that's because all these together blend into creating a performance and performing in a classroom or writing a paper or taking a test. And I know that in the chat room, someone had added that positive thinking, negative thinking is really important. And that's what we're going to talk about next is our attitude toward it, because literally our stomach releases either serotonin or cortisol, depending on how we process or, how we perceive a situation that we're learning in. Did you want to add anything there, Donna? Okay.
I'm good. You covered it.
We'll go to the next slide. So just real quick, I'll try to talk about attitude with emotions and thoughts. Did the next slide? Oh, there we go. Our thoughts matter. So, I don't know exactly how many thoughts we all think a day. You can look in different resources and there's different numbers from 6,000 to 80,000. But just by the National Science Foundation, we think about 12 to 60,000 thoughts per day. And 80% of those thoughts are negative. 95 are repetitive thoughts. So what we do is we have to be aware, and we even, this is that metacognition piece where we're addressing this with the student and saying, is your thinking taking you down a road that's going to help you perform? Or is your thinking taking you down a road that's putting you blocks, brick walls in your way? Are you talking positively or are you talking negatively? Because your body, your brain, your stomach is all going to respond to that. And so I know that what we think is absolutely critical to if we're going to be able to perform. And we all kind of go through that experience, right? Whether we're standing in front of a crowd publicly talking or whatever the case may be, we all know that you got to try to keep your thoughts positive to keep yourself calm. And we can go to the next slide real quick. And Donna, I'll pass that to you.
So again, in the chat or just unmuting yourself, what tools or skills have you used with your children or students to help them calm their emotions and thoughts?
I like that idea. Breathing techniques, that's a great idea.
5-finger breathing, a bear hug, distraction, cool down bin with sensory items, the 5 sensory techniques, breathing, counting, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. Yep. Yeah, those are all ways that you can kind of get them distracted, get their brain distracted, and not thinking about the negative thoughts or the spiral that they've put themselves into through those negative thoughts. Singing a song, a silly song, I love that. Breathing, meditation.
Those are all great ideas. And what it's also doing is it's connecting a student to their body. And I think we're noticing that these students, as digitally connected as they are, we have to reaffirm, like, let's connect to our body. Let's be aware what's going on with our heart. Think about what's going on with your heart rate. And, I just want to suggest, if you guys are in a classroom, one thing that's really powerful is yoga walking. And I don't know why it's called that, but what it is having a student walk, but they have to think about every piece of their foot as it hits the ground, from the heel to the middle to the front. So we're getting them to focus on something on their body because we need them to connect to that. And like Donna said, it's also a distraction from whatever's worrying them. Let's feel the calmness of your feet. So our kids do a lot of, walking meditation. Yep, that's exactly it.
I love the idea with the negative thoughts, giving them a funny name.
Yes.
Because then it's not negative, it's funny and can bring in that humor. And humor is something that can immediately calm us. It's like one things in life that if someone can get you to laugh, then that serotonin is activated and you can just calm, or the melatonin is activated, you can just calm yourself and be happy again. And it's a great way to be silly with kids. Like I'll make a funny face. Like they'll be talking to me and make a funny face and they'll be like, "What are you doing, Mr. Heel?" "Well, I don't know, you tell me." And then it gets them off that thought. Alicia, the book Burnout, they refer to the negative self-talk as mad woman in the attic. That's a great resource. I haven't heard of that one before. I'll have to look it up. Yes, Jade, naming what they're grateful for, focusing on the positive rather than that negative. Okay, you can go to.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jen. No, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, I'm so glad that was brought up because we're going to look at what happens, neurologically in our brain when we are thinking positive thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
So, I'm always trying to create a picture for students when we're talking about this. So when I say, hey, flip the switch to positive, that's not necessarily enough for them to do it. So I have to look things up and I have to go, okay, this is why you have to think positively, because your brain literally lights up and it expands. It starts to connect to other things. And so when someone says, hey, how are you doing? Our body even releases oxytocin and says, somebody cares about me. So that oxytocin is a social connection reaction. And so on a remote learning space, even when I see teachers doing it all the time, they greet every single person that comes on. They ask every single kiddo what's going on and if they have questions. And that's so positive because it's really reaffirming, okay, this person cares about me. I'm going to participate. And really, that is a big challenge for remote learning, is if kids don't feel that connection, they don't want to participate. And then they get all stressed out and behind. So I just wanted to let you know that the positive thinking is very chemically important. We can go to the next slide.
And can I jump in real quick? What I've seen teachers do in remote learning too is if they see a student disengaging or starting to get stressed, they'll say, come to a breakout room with me for a second, and give the other students either a quick break or a task that they can do or a question that they share out as a group while the teacher takes that student into a breakout room and talks to them and asks them how they're feeling right now. And then once they're done, they move back into the next session. So that's a way that you can do that in remote learning with other students in the room.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I haven't seen that yet, but that's a good idea. Or, just grabbing their attention and asking like, hey, what are you learning? What did you guys learn from this lesson? And trying to grab their ability to express, this is what I've just learned. And that's really important because that's helping them categorize and think and sort through what you're teaching or what the teacher's teaching. So all of this positive thinking and connecting to kids is helping our processing speed. It's helping kids stay on task because they are very loyal to the teacher on the other side when there's that connection. We can go to the next slide. And this is just what Donna was referring to, that metacognition, thinking about our thinking, is all what leads to these synaptic connections, the neuroplasticity of our brain, our ability to compensate and grow and learn new skills. It's really phenomenal what we're learning, and it's really cool. And to share that with kids, they like to learn about it too. So it's a bit, we're going a bit deep here, but it's kind of cool to know why these things are important and that it's backed up by science.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, thanks. And then, of course, negative thinking. So I referred earlier to the two parts of the brain that are constantly fighting, the limbic system and the prefrontal lobe. And so the prefrontal lobe, if it's negative thinking, it's shutting down and it's giving way to our limbic system. So negative thinking is going, okay, I'm just going to think with my emotions, and this is how I feel. And so we have to we have to acknowledge that and say, okay, let's get you out of there. It's interesting because you can even lie to your brain. We joke around and we laugh a lot. Like Donna referred to earlier, laughing's the best thing. So when I hear negative thinking, I try to make it exactly the opposite, positive, and then kind of laugh about it with the student. So if they say, I hate math, then I say, oh my gosh, I heard you just say you love math. I love math. Math is awesome. And then we just kind of joke. And, we know that I love math really doesn't mean I love math, but we know that we're turning our brain on, we're turning on our ability to perform, and we're calming down our emotions because we're laughing a bit about it. So we can actually just take whatever's negative, flip it to the exact opposite, and our brain will believe it. Even if we're laughing about it. So that's important. Do you want to add anything, Donna?
No, and I think what I want to pick up, Jade said something earlier today about optimism, but it's not just being positive, but it's about having an optimistic outlook, because then you can see movement with optimism. And positive for many of us is, well, was it good or bad? Whereas optimism, you can talk about the positive, and then optimistically, how are we going to move along this path together? And so then optimism makes a goal and a pathway to positivity. Yes,
that's right. And sometimes sarcasm can be the bridge. Go to the next slide. So the good news is that, like I just said, we can trick our brain into positive pathways, and that's really important. You can do that. Y'all should just experiment with that. Find something that is a challenge for you, and then try for a week to exactly flip it in the opposite direction. And you'll find that if you hold that thought enough, it becomes the truth. So I think y'all should just try it. I mean, I always do that too. I always try it on myself and my family before I ever assume it's really going to help. And someone had mentioned in the chat to be grateful, and gratitude is so important. It releases all these great chemicals, and gratitude for just 3 minutes has been proven to be gratitude for 5 minutes has been proven to be as effective as a 30-minute walk. So just having students list things or think about things, talk about things that they're grateful for 5 minutes can actually prime the brain to learn. And then it stamps out those automatic negative thoughts too. That's important.
And the way that you can do this for yourself too, and what I try to do too, some days I don't feel like getting up for work, or I have so much to do. How am I going to get through all of this? And I think to myself, I take a minute and I think, well, I'm lucky I have a job to worry about these things and these tasks to do and the family things that I need to get through. And then that shifts me to grateful and my positive outlook. Okay, I can get through this. And at night when I'm done, I'm going to be grateful for that, what I got through, and that I have another day to do whatever I didn't finish the next day, and time to wind down and a bed to sleep in at night. Just simple things that you can do each day.
And it is simple, and it's simple to do remote learning too, because it's simply asking each person, you know, listening to their answer and saying, what are you grateful for? And you're priming their brain to perform, to learn.
Or what are you looking forward to today?
Yes, it's so good to do that. This is just something we talk about with students because we want to keep our amygdala and our hippocampus happy, because that's our limbic system that wants to take over. So sometimes we just calm down our amygdala and hippocampus by making sure we have food and something slightly sugary if they need that. And an item that keeps them happy. It's usually their phone, but we have to say, like, okay, let's cognitively think about how your phone has got to take a break. We're going to put it to bed. It's over here. And then we're going to make a plan. And once we kind of meet kids at each of these levels, they start each step of this is like, I'm able to perform more, I'm ready. You can go to the next slide. And here are some ideas. So, you know, this is just backed up by science, and I'm sure y'all have lots of ideas. Donna, do you want to ask them their ideas first?
Yeah. What are some ways that you guys have utilized, even for yourselves or those you work with, ways to be more productive? To-do list, yep.
List, and alarms. Yep.
That time management piece with the alarms and the time blocking, that's a great way. And then sometimes you have to follow up with the student to say, oh, your list says this at this time, and are you ready to move into that? with only one tab open.
I know for myself, I have to kind of organize my space, whether I'm working at home or I'm working in my office. Before I can get productive, you know, things have to be put away. I don't know if y'all do that, but when we were all working from home, it was like I had to have an organized room that I was in before I could even start.
Yes.
What about you, Donna? What did you notice about your?
Well, even same thing. I even woke up on Saturday morning and my girls had made a mess in the kitchen. I was going to make food and I couldn't even start until everything was clean and ready to go. Right? Like you just have to have that clear space and that organized world to be able to then work through your tasks and your list.
Yeah.
Taking a break from the computer. And that's something that we have to recognize with a lot of our students with remote learning. Their classes, like Jennifer said earlier, they're jumping from one teacher's link to the next teacher's link or onto another online program all throughout the day. And so being mindful for those students who struggle with this specifically, of creating breaks for them to get that snack or take a 5-minute walk, or even at the start of class, giving all your students a couple minutes just to talk about what they're grateful for, or share out what they've done today, and have that opportunity to have a break before they have to transition their brain into the next subject.
Right. And I personally love the smile for 60 seconds because it's hard to actually smile for 60 seconds. And then you start to naturally laugh at yourself. It's like you can't smile and not almost laugh at yourself for trying to do it for 60 seconds. That's really fun to do. But it is hard to keep it there. And I use a timer so that the student knows, like, oh my gosh, I have 28 seconds, and it just becomes funny. And the reason why we're talking about our emotions and our thoughts is because it's going to lead to how well do we learn, and are we primed and ready to learn? That's what our next slide is going to talk about. So real learning, um, we're all told that we have a learning style, but sometimes we forget to tell students why it matters. And the learning style is because we learn with our senses. We learn through our eyes, our hands, our ears, our heart, our head, our gut, our stomach. We make all sorts of connections, and all those connections connect to something we call prior knowledge. And prior knowledge is in our long-term memory. So when we use our learning senses, our learning style, we're connecting to our long-term memory because we're connecting to prior knowledge. So that's something that's really important. And so we say to students often, how do you need to use your eyes, your ears, your head, your heart in that science class? How can you engage in a way that, you're ready to learn? What are you doing? And if you're just sitting there and you're disconnected, you're not engaged and you're not learning. So again, making kids aware of what the point is of their learning style and how their head, their heart, and their gut are connected to all of this with long-term memory. We can go to the next slide. Maybe people have questions about that. I don't know if that's unusual.
Well, and that's something that we want to talk to you guys, or have you guys share. What is your personal learning style? Mm-hmm. Is it kinesthetic? Is it auditory, visual? Or what other ways do you learn? What do you need to learn personally?
Yeah, and Jade just made a good point in the chat. She said, there's more than one sense that we learn. There's more than one sense that we use. And that's exactly right. But you want to definitely know what your how do you remember information? So for instance, when you meet somebody else and they say, hi, my name's Donna. Do you need to write it down and see it? Do you need to touch her hand to remember it? Do you need to hear her voice? What is your prime source of locking information into your long-term memory? And then Jade, you're right. We are using many senses. And in fact, the more senses that we engage, the better we're learning, the deeper we're taking it.
Yeah, and being able to have that multisensory approach. Like everybody's always saying, especially for students with dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, that multisensory approach, people think, oh, what is that? All that is pairing all these different learning modalities and, like Jennifer said, using as many of the senses as you can to create that wiring and that memory, and really for them to solidify what they have learned. So like rather than just having a student say you might say A and show them the picture of an A with an apple paired with it and say A apple and have them air write the A at the same time, or use a pencil with the eraser on the desk to write the A as they're saying that, and as they're saying A apple and that helps them with remembering. So that's all a multisensory approach is. It's not a big secret, but it's something that you can do in at any time when you're teaching kids.
And it can be a challenge for certain. I mean, to do your head, your heart, your hands, your gut, all that for a teacher in a classroom, especially on remote learning, that can definitely be a challenge. And so you have to be pretty creative about how can I get them to not only see it, but hear it, feel it, talk about it, and process it. And I do see that's where I see teachers using those groups where they say, go into small groups and talk about this and share your ideas. And that's important stuff because they're processing with other kids, trying to organize and categorize the way they're thinking about it. And all that is truly just multisensory. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Next slide.
Yeah, so this next slide, this is an interesting thing I look at from time to time. There's a test, an international test called the PISA, and it's a program for international student assessment, and it compares students all over the world, where they're at. And what we find is that when a student knows how to learn, and how to learn means they know how to use their learning style. They know study skills. They know how to organize. They know how to get ready for a test. When a student learns how they need to learn it, they score 73 points higher than students who don't use study skills. And that means that they're one full proficiency or nearly 2 school years ahead, because teaching them how they learn is what advances their learning. And we know that in college, when kids go to college and they have study skills, they have a 75 or 85% chance they're going to pass that freshman year with no problems. But if they don't have study skills, they have a 50-50 chance. So a lot of people are learning about those study skills or what their learning style is when they go to college, because you either sink or float. So our learning style is so important because that's what wires these neural connections. That's what sparks our memory. That's what connects to prior knowledge. So it's so important. And the next slide will kind of prime them for, Donna, you want them to have something to think about between now and next week. So this is called Discover Your Learning Style. This is something we use with students, and you're welcome to use it as well. We want you on the other end to kind of think about your learning style, and we want you to join us again next week to share with us what your learning style is, or maybe you know right now what it is. And knowing that there's a difference between visual verbal and visual pictures is really important, because as I say to students, we actually knew how to draw pictures before we knew how to write a language. And so our brain really likes pictures. So when we're working with kids with dyslexia, or we're working with kids online, giving them visual pictures to create context is really important, because that helps prime their thinking and their imagining and their processing of it. So some people love the language. So for me, I love to see the words, but for other kids, they like to see the images and the pictures, and other kids just want to hear about it. So it's really interesting when we stop to look at how is your brain wired to learn? So you want them, Donna, to think about this for the next session?
Yes, please. And you can also have more than one, like Jade pointed out, visual and kinesthetic paired, but you usually have one primary way that you learn if you really think about it. And if you really take a moment to consider what is my go-to. And even the way that I kind of look at it for me is, if I'm in crisis, if my brain is shutting down, how do I respond, or what do I need to be able to move forward? Is it that auditory word, or is it getting up and moving my body? And when you're in crisis, that's your typical natural learning style that you'll automatically fall back to.
Right. And next week we have a lot of, at least 10 different examples of how to apply these things online, with different exercises, how to incorporate the multisensory and the emotional. So we had to spend a lot of time on the emotions and the thoughts so that we can understand that that's where we need to meet kids. And I know that's why Donna and GSN are doing these social emotional learning episodes, because we live in a stressful world. We're all under a lot of stress in the past year, and we have to kind of meet kids there, but we don't want to just stay in the emotions. We want them to learn that we're going to talk about the emotions and meet those emotions, and then we're going to move forward and we're going to perform. Mm-hmm. So with that, Donna, is there anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so. We just hope to see you back for part 2, because we're going to continue giving you some ideas. And like Jennifer Precious, she's going to give you some actual ways that you can work with students, like recognizing the flags on the beach, or visuals that you can use with them as we're working. We wanted to give you the foundation of knowledge so that next week we can have those ideas and that level of understanding to understand how they relate to the whole picture.
Right, because when we talk about time, because time management is part of executive functioning, we have to make time visual. So these exercises that we'll talk about next week are very multisensory. They're very visual. They're taking what is abstract, and through the exercise, it's creating concrete thinking and understanding, and students are feeling. They understand the feelings behind it, and then that's a really helpful piece to prime them to turn on their learning style and engage. So thanks for having me today. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope all of you join us next week.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Donna. So like they said, guys, please go ahead and register for next week's part 2 of this presentation if you're interested. Ellen has put that link in the chat for you. It's also on this slide here, if you would just click on the register here at the bottom. Other resources that we have for you in the meantime are our January SEL monthly theme newsletter. We also have executive functioning activities from Harvard University that are available in both English and Spanish if you need that translation. And we also have grab and go activities that focus on executive function and time management so that you can have like quick and easy activities to use in your classroom. You don't have to have this huge lesson plan. So those are just really handy activities for you to use. And you can go to the next slide, Ellen. And we also want your feedback. We're always looking to improve our efforts through your feedback. And so if you could just take 2 minutes before logging off to complete our short survey, we would really, really appreciate it. Ellen has put that link in the chat box for you. And that's all we have for you today, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your attention this afternoon. And we hope that you have gained some insight from this presentation and that you're going to bring it back into your classrooms or to your home and use it. And please remember, once again, register for part 2. And for your convenience, we have added Jennifer and Donna's contact information into the chat box so you can reach out with any questions or comments that you have. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we will see you next time. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.